Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Michael Starr wants us to watch our words. Today, he'll explain why. Michael, thanks for being with us today.
You're very welcome. It's an honor to be here, Bill.
Michael, you've written a book, Journey into Peace. And can you give our audience, just so they know what's coming, what is the book about?
The book is about the remarkable impact that language has on us in terms of our ability to think, our ability to perceive, and how it impacts the way we respond and make decisions based on those perceptions. And it's not just about using words carefully, it's about actually debunking certain words as either useless or dangerous. And in some cases, I've created some new words and terminology. So it's like a whole new language. It's maybe to some degree like learning Swahili, as I attempted to do when I went to Tanzania a few years ago.
And I'll take a quote from the beginning of the book. Our words and language often create barriers that limit and stifle progress and improvement. Now, obviously, that's what we're all about, progress and improvement. We want to be successful. And you start your book off with a story about two dogs, which sounds funny when we're talking about language. But tell us why those two dogs will give us an example of what this is about.
Yes, sir. My contention is baked into the words that we use, woven into them, are self-fulfilling prophecies. The words we use actually can help us create success or progress or to fail or just go around in circles. That they have really embedded in them kind of a way of manifesting the things that we want. And I use the example of our two dogs, Rippy and Lola. They're both rescue dogs. They both weigh about 10 pounds. And Rippy's a Chihuahua, and he was the latest addition. And after having Rippy for a couple of weeks, I mentioned to my wife, I says, Karen, this is the most unfriendly dog we've ever had. I'd approach him and he'd kind of shy away, or sometimes he'd want to kind of take a bite at me, and he's real fidgety. And I thought about it in the context of my book, and I said to myself, Mike, because that's how I talk to myself. I says, hey, Mike, let's look at this in terms of languaging. And I says, maybe Rippy, being a rescue dog, maybe he was abused in his last life. Maybe just it's baked into his DNA as a Chihuahua. Maybe he's got that small dog syndrome. Maybe he's fearful and afraid. It's hard to say. That changed my languaging with Rippy. So I no longer think of him in terms of unfriendly, which if you look at someone unfriendly, you can imagine how your response or interaction with that would be with that. You might be kind of polite and kind. But if you see someone is damaged, fearful, afraid, maybe abused, you have this empathy that wells up within you, at least I do. And it's been really excellent improving my relationship with Rippy. And I think that analogy plays out itself well in our relationship with people.
I think that's a great example, and that you've picked that up with your two dogs, and yet we do it all day long, and probably it never dawns on us that if we just change something. Now, I'm fascinated to know, because literally on every page of the book, I'm learning something here as I'm going through it. What kind of feedback are you getting? Is most of the feedback, is it from business people, pastors, religious leaders, people in sales where they're trying to influence people to buy their product? Politicians? I'm
very active in the Al-Anon community, which is a support for families of alcoholics. I'm also active in the NAMI organization, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness. So I have a lot of involvement in those two communities. And I get a lot of, positive feedback from people that I've either given a book to or have read it about the impact it has on their ability to A, self-care, take care of themselves, and B, to interact with others in a healthy manner. I'm a sci-fi fan from way back, and in Star Trek: The Next Generation, there's this enemy called the Borg, and they're in this square, and they're traveling through space, and they're after Captain Picard, and their phrase they use in there is resistance is futile. Well, I find in these communities dealing with addicts, alcoholism, mental illness, there is a lot of resistance to reality, and that creates a lot of pain. And when we accept things for what they are, I call it the natural order things, we stop fighting with reality, we make peace with it, and we not just accept it, but we come about what I call an objective, empowering acceptance that really bolsters us to choose wise courses in dealing with the most difficult of challenges, which would be in the addiction community and the mental health community. It works there, and it works even easier and better in just regular everyday life as well.
And that's funny. That would have been the last group I would have thought of. I would have, like I said, teachers, someone who's public speakers, lawyers, certainly, because they're in the courtroom, judges, etc. And you bring out something new literally either when I'm talking to you or on every page of the book. You mentioned early on in the book that there's 3 categories of language. I think this is on page 4. Can you tell me what those categories are?
Yeah, there's what's promoted is wise, empowering language, which is certain words that are worth using, some words that I've created. There's other words that are useless language that take us round and round on the carousel going nowhere, and when the music stops, we're back to where we were, which is the definition of insanity. And those are words like forgiveness, which is not a doable verb. Patience is not a doable word. Willpower. So those are useless words. They take us nowhere. If you're trying to deal with harboring animosity, forgiveness is not the word. And then lastly, there's dangerous and tyrannical words that actually make things worse for us in other relationships. And in our current culture, there's a lot of dangerous and tyrannical words that are promoting what I call contra-identities, where people are defining themselves in opposition to others. I'm good because you're bad. I'm smart because you're stupid. I'm wise because you're a fool. And it is so tragic to see that people, rather than having a tendency to identify themselves through merit, through accomplishment, through the good that they do, they do it in this sort of really, I call it a contra identity, negative identity. So I encourage people to be on guard against dangerous and tyrannical words and don't contribute to the pain. Don't use useless words as a means to achieve progress and healing. By all means, use wise, empowering words to improve your relationships, not only with other people, but with yourself.
I'm thinking just that you mentioned that, and that was something I was going to get to later. In the world we're in today, boy, is this book important. It should be must, and I mean really must reading, whether it's through your church, your political group, the school you're at. This should definitely be on that required reading list. Because of the way we communicate today, is this even more important? Social media, where we don't even bother with words. There's 2 and 3 letters and little emojis and small figures. And half the time I don't even know what these people are doing, these emojis. So when someone smiles or does something, I don't know if I did something good, bad, or they're laughing at me. So I just accept it and move on. Does that make your job even harder?
I think it makes my commitment to the message ever more strong. We're living in times that are very, I guess, dangerous. Not so much in terms of, say, international activities, which there are a lot of things to be concerned about, but how people are treating one another. Whatever happened to let's agree to disagree? Whatever happened to civil debate? Whatever happened to why do you feel that way? One story that I think really epitomizes what I'm striving to do is there was and is a black R&B musician by the name of Daryl Davis. Daryl grew up in the Northeast. He was subjected to some very poignant examples of racism, and he had this question, how can someone hate me who doesn't even know me? And so he was on this quest to try to understand that. And as he was performing and was a very good artist, he played with Tommy Lee Jones and a bunch of other folks, and I may have got that name wrong, but he's very well known in the R&B community. He met up with somebody in the audience, and they somewhat became acquaintances, and the person in the audience admitted that he was a member of the KKK. Well, Daryl used that connection to set up a meeting with the Grand Dragon of Maryland, Roger Kelly. And Roger didn't realize that Daryl was black. Long story short, they got to know one another. They eventually even ate each other's homes. And Roger invited Daryl to KKK rallies where they had the white with the burning cross and all of that. And Daryl's approach was he's going to respect the people. He's going to respect their right to think the way they do. He certainly didn't respect their ideology. And he was very, very focused on, why do you feel this way? And is that, you think that really makes sense? And because of his kind, respectful, empathetic, and that's what's missing so much today, empathy for others, not realizing that people can't help being who they are. As the result of all that, he's done TED Talks, TEDx Talks, and what he'll do near the end of the talk, he brings out, and Roger Kelly eventually became Imperial Wizard in the national movement of the KKK, he brings out Roger Kelly's Imperial Wizard robe. Roger Kelly and 200 other people in the KKK disavowed their membership with the KKK because of what I call the relationship listening, the respectful listening, the willingness to try to understand why someone feels the way they do, clearly a wrong way to think. And because of that, look at the effect he had. And if he could do that with members of the KKK, could you imagine the possibility and the potentiality we have today with the divisiveness and the cancel culture and a lot of really, just mean-spirited things? I think there's possibility there.
Michael, before we go further, I'd like to let our audience know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Michael M. Starr, that's Starr. His book is Journey into Peace. And Michael, would you tell us the website where we can find out more information about this and maybe learn a few of the points you're talking about?
Yes, sir. It would be www.executivecoachingservices.net.
And we'll give that information again and ask you for it later in the show. So if listeners did not get it down, they'll have a second opportunity, or they can simply go to nccradio.org and listen to a podcast of the show, look for Secrets of Success, and then Journey into Peace with our guest, Michael Starr. Michael, you have something called betterism. And when I first heard that, I said, this almost sounds like a Seinfeld routine. What is betterism?
I coined that word. I'm not alone to have used the word. I believe the word I found after the fact is used by others in a different way. But I wanted the word that would, characterize growth and improvement. I started out with a word called more or less, but my editor at the time said that sucked. And so we came up with a better word, betterism. And it's about the ongoing process of focusing on being better, having more peace, more progress, more healing, more happiness, less conflict, less anger, less despondency. And baked into that, I think at the heart of that is the concept of Noot, N-O-O-T, the natural order of things. And the premise is that if we study, if we seek to understand, if we really look into why someone became as they had become, including ourselves, why events became as they had become as well, we would come to the conclusion it was inevitable that it became as it became. And it diffuses anger, it diffuses, I think, hatred, and it gives us a very calm sense of empathy and compassion about, I don't care if you're Genghis Khan or Mother Teresa. There was a reason why people became the way they did. It may not be a good reason. But to follow that up, after we have this empathy and compassion, I call it the EBC symbiotic 3. You start with empathy, and then you set wise boundaries. And what are you going to do when this type of event or this type of person's behavior occurs again, because it's probably toxic or undesirable, and you have what I call dispassionate consequences. So when you have the empathy and you have wise boundaries and you have dispassionate consequences, I call it be the umbrella opener. When we're walking and we're carrying an umbrella and it starts raining, do we shake our fist at the sky? Do we get angry? Do we talk about woulda, coulda, shoulda? Or do we just open the umbrella and keep on going? And so that's one of my terminologies in the book, and I have over 20 of them. Be the umbrella opener. So you have these dispassionate boundaries and you put them in effect. And maybe you stop the conversation, maybe you walk out of the room, maybe in the long run you end up getting divorced or you quit your job. Although in most cases I think that is done prematurely and too soon. But you have a plan of what you're going to do when something occurs, and you don't fear or have anxiety about something undesirable happen, because if it does, you just open up your umbrella.
Now, Michael, you brought up so many good points. How do words become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Tell us about that, because, again, we're on the trail to success. We want to avoid the negatives, the things that are going to hold us back in life. And if it's some of our words, and we may not even know that we're using certain words, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we don't. It's like, if you think about the history of language and linguistics, etc., there was a time in our evolution we didn't have words like sharing. We didn't have words like despondency. Those words evolved, and in the scientific communities, they've evolved and grown in very logical manners. But in our everyday life, they've become somewhat haphazard. In some cases, they've been weaponized to create confusion, etc., etc. But, to use words like, talk about useless words, forgiveness. Now, how many people do you know, because I know quite a few myself, how many people are harboring animosity about something, about an event? It could be a very big trauma like abuse. It could be maybe just harboring bad feelings about an employer or a boss or even a spouse. And we harbor these feelings, and they infect us. And we replay them. We replay this being victimized, and we replay this injustice that occurred to us. And, I think it was Mark Twain says anger creates more damage to the vessel in which it's stored and then to the object on which it's poured. And so we get consumed with this, and many people do. And so to say go and forgive, to me, it's useless. It doesn't create anything. If I said, okay, hey, Bill, I'm going to go Madriding, and you say, what the heck is that, Mike? Oh, I'm going to Madrid. I'll just Madriding. You'll be like, well, don't you need to get a car? Don't you need to get on a plane? Don't you need to get on a ship? Oh, I'm Madriding. It's not a vehicle to get there. So if we want to go from not harboring animosity, from harboring animosity to no longer harboring it, there's another vehicle. Forgiveness is not the deal. The way you do it, one way, and there may be others, is through understanding. Through understanding the natural order of things, that people couldn't help being who they are, given their birth order, their genetics, their gender, their height, their family, their socioeconomic status, their era they grew up in, their geography is inevitable. They became who they became. And even some of the most horrific, hurt that we may have received from people, we could understand why people became that way. We don't agree with it, but we understand it. And once you get to the point, there's nothing to forgive. Then it's a matter of setting boundaries with consequences, what I talked about before, the EBC symbiotic 3. So I have a whole chapter on it. It says, forget forgiveness, go for self-exorcism. And I give these steps you can take to understand yourself, understand the other person, understand the situation, and setting boundaries. And it's a very effective way where some people are in therapy for literally years in trying to deal with, this anger, this despondency about the past. So that's an effective way to go about that. And I have many, many examples. I'll just throw one more out in terms of listening. People talk about listening like a lot of us talk about goodness. But I have a term that I think is much more meaningful and effective. I call it relationship listening. Relationship listening. We listen with the intent of improving the relationship. We either learn something about ourselves, or we learn something about them, or we learn something about the world. And I talk about be the student listener. So you're listening to learn. Be the empowering mirror. Reflect back what you heard the other person say, and as much as possible in an empowering way as possible. I was absolutely stunned in a positive way by a book by Javier Amador, which is on schizophrenia. It says, I am not sick, I don't need help. And he's sold millions of copies of this book. And it's got a process called LEAP. Begins with listening, empathy, agreement, and partnership. But the key is this reflective listening, which I call relationship listening, that is extremely powerful. That if we can build the trust by not being judgmental and giving people the acknowledgement that, I see why you believe the way you do. We don't necessarily have to agree with them, and acknowledging their right to feel as they do without judging them, that they are much more prone to be open to ideas we present them. So if in the world of schizophrenia, where the patients tend to resist medication and tend to resist psychotherapy, if that is so that effective in that, could you imagine what we can do just in our marriages alone? It's just through what I call relationship listening to learn and acknowledge and show care and concern without judgment.
Michael, I want to follow up with that point in a second, but just at this point in the show, I want our audience to know, in case you're just tuning in, you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Michael M. Starr, Starr. His book is Journey into Peace. It's about the purpose of language, the words we use, and how we use them. And Michael, would you tell us the website where we can learn more?
Yes, sir. It's www.executivecoachingservices.net.
And I would say to our audience, if some things aren't going the way you want, you heard Michael say that our words can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Get hold of this book. Take a look at it. Just see, this might be the cure that puts you on the track. And you might even say, hey, it's either me, my boss, and maybe we don't get along, so we should go in different directions and we'll both be happier, or my spouse. And speaking of that, Michael, I was going to ask you, it might almost be scary talking to you, because do you come away after you talk to a couple, let's say you meet a few people at a party or something, do you walk away and say, oh, that couple isn't going to last, or that employee won't be at this company in 6 months, just based on what, can you make a real assessment based on their words and, I guess, body language?
I would say I'm always optimistic and hopeful for people. I actually, we have an Airbnb here, and we had a couple that flew in for the eclipse, and I could tell there were some issues that one of the members in the couple had, actually with his mother, type of thing, that was producing some angst for them. But you could see where there's going to be challenges ahead, because one of the two needs to kind of take ownership for listening, caring, empathy, setting boundaries. I mean, if it doesn't necessarily take two to tango, not in the world of healthy relationships, not necessarily. But if not either one of them are open, willing, or even can conceptualize the potentiality that by changing the way they interact with their spouse, they can turn an unhealthy relationship into much healthier relationships through empathy, boundaries, and compassion. So you can see where, yes, people have challenges ahead of them, particularly with the younger couples.
And I could see, even as an employee, where just by reading this book, you might say, you know what, I'm not going to be at this company in 5 years, so why should I be here in 5 months? Maybe now is the time to start looking around, because it's just not based on what I'm hearing, what's being said back and forth, etc. It's just not in the cards. And there's nothing bad about that. It's just that the two entities, maybe they have different philosophies or views of how something should be done, that both go their own way and be a lot happier, I would think. I think that's true. I think there's two sides to that issue. The one side is sometimes a square peg's in a round hole. And it behooves the organization to try to fit people into the role that they best fit in. So sometimes we have to realize this is not a role that I'm suited for. But I would say more often than not, if we have a wiser, I would say more enlightened view of reality, of what it is and what it isn't, I would say more often than not, we can turn a pretty mediocre job or not such a good job into a really fulfilling job, just by changing our view and our perspective of the people and the reality around us. Now, Michael, just based on what people have heard today, until they can get out and get your book, Journey into Peace, Can you give us a tip that's something we could do tomorrow to start to see if we're fitting into this mold of watching our language, watching the words we use and how we use them? Is there an early or starter's drill you have?
I would say there's some flags. Like we drive a vehicle, we have warning lights. Red lights, amber lights, flashing lights, and those are things worth paying attention to. So I think it's wise to be able to notice things that maybe you might be ashamed to admit. Like, I have resentment. I have resentment about my wife doing this or my husband doing this, or I'm feeling frustrated about this. So I think it begins with being honest with yourself about, are you having resentment? Are you having anger? Are you having despondency? And I think if you notice that, then that's an indication. I've often said that resentment is a big alarm for a need to improve something in ourselves. And more often than not, it's us and our perception of the reality around us where, kind of resistance is futile. So if we have a resentment or an anger, let's start with empathy. But for the grace of God, there go I. I'm not a practicing Christian anymore. I was for many years. I have great, great admiration for Christianity on many levels. In the Bible, it says, Christ said, while on the cross, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." The key word is not forgive them. The key phrase is, for they know not what they do. If we could get to the point in life where we have compassion for people, we have empathy for them, we understand they couldn't help being who they become, we just diffuse a need for resentment or anger, and now we focus our energies more on what is my wise boundary and what is a consequence that I'm going to put in place each and every time it's crossed or encroached upon, and do it in a dispassionate way. So I guess in summary, look for those alarms about resentment, anger, despondency, and start with empathy and set up boundaries and take responsibility for having a fun and enjoyable life. And one last thing I would like to add. It's very important, Bill, that we be friends with ourselves. If my wife was here, she would tell you, if you ask Mike who his best friend, he won't hesitate to tell you he's his own best friend. And the reason I'm my best friend is because I like what I do. We don't like people because of their behavior. They're mean.
Michael, I'm sorry I have to cut you off because we're just getting to the end of our time. But we like what you do, and what you've done is write a wonderful book, Journey into Peace, by our guest, Michael M. Starr. Please give that website once again real quick.
www.executivecoachingservices.net.
Michael, thanks for being with us.
Amazon.
I'm sorry to cut you off. You've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.